Well, it's a sunny, humid day in mid-July here, and I like to add seasonal tree ID videos and things every few months to this channel, and today I decided to stay where it's cooler. We're going to be exploring the Roy Latham Maritime Forest Trail and several other trails out here at Orient Beach State Park. This is at the east end of the North Fork of Long Island in Suffolk County, S-U-F-F-O-L-K. This is where the road ends, and you have to take a ferry to get here if you're coming from the mainland or go through New York City. I chose the former and took the ferry over from the port of New London, Connecticut. So we'll see what we can find out here. I've already seen a lot of plants that you don't see on the mainland too often. And one of them is post oak, and it's just everywhere out here. So we'll be exploring this Maritime Trail here, which is a guided trail with some educational signs along the way. And we're also going to walk out the 2.5 miles to the end of the beach. The road ends right here, and the beach keeps going. And the Maritime Forest keeps going, at least most of the way out there. So we'll see how much time we have. We'll see what we can find. But I'm already finding all kinds of post oak out here. There's one right here. And we'll take a close look at these as we go today, but they just look different. The form of these trees. The branches always come out at 90 degrees. Kind of like black gum. And it could fool you for a white oak, and there is white oak out here to compare it with. So let's take a few hours and really explore this Maritime Forest. By Maritime Forest, I mean a forest community that is only found within a few hundred feet of the ocean, or in this case, Long Island Sound. Especially adapted to sand. These plants are adapted to sandy soil and salt spray. And a lot of these trees, these red cedars, post oak, there's even supposed to be blackjack oak back here, do not survive well in competitive environments. In other words, they cannot withstand being in the shade of other trees. Here's some post oak right here, being backlit by this midsummer sun. So I don't think I've ever seen post oak when the leaves were green. I've always seen it in the fall and winter, and the leaves stick around in the winter. So we'll take a good look at these leaves. We'll see if we can find some acorns. We'll look at the bark when needed or when available. It's supposed to be blackjack oak out here too. We'll see if we can find some. I'm seeing mostly post oak and red cedar right now. But this is definitely a unique habitat compared to the inland forest in this area. Well, the flowers are just about done on this prickly pear cactus. And there should be some edible fruits forming in the next few weeks. I've never had them, but I know they're edible. And that's the only cactus that grows native in the eastern half of the country. So that's one plant I think you could say for sure you know you have the right plant, and you're not going to hurt yourself by eating something that's not native and could harm you. Well, that prickly pear cactus cannot tolerate shade, and neither can the seedlings of the post oak, blackjack oak, and red cedar. Now, just for comparison, I've got a white oak here. Again, the branches don't come quite out at 90 degrees. They're more at an angle here. Maybe a little bit at 90, but the form is different on these trees. And if we can get an upper branch on a white oak tree, the color of the bark of the white oak and the post oak is almost identical. The texture can be the same, but on the upper branches, in this case the upper branches at eye level, we always get these flakes. So it's like the bark wants to open up like a door hinge on these white oak trees, and the post oak tree tends to be more blocky and not hinged like that. So here's our white oak leaf, which I got some light on these white oak trees. We can see the luster a little better. They're not terribly shiny. They have many lobes. They're rounded lobes and rounded between the lobes. And so is a post oak, but the post oak is very shiny, thicker, and with less lobes. We'll look at those in just a minute here. So the upper bark, or the bark on the upper branches where visible, is a giveaway. The leaves being less shiny, more of a flat, dull green, and more lobes. It's one way we can tell these trees apart. And right behind this white oak, we've got some post oak, and actually the post oak is more common than the white oak back here. You can just see the shine on these leaves. Look at that shine. So they're thicker, they're waxier. The wax helps it survive in situations where it gets dried out quickly, like in a prairie area where they're often found. As you go from the eastern deciduous forest to the prairies, the post oak is one of the last trees standing as you go west. So that waxy, shiny surface helps it survive in situations where conserving water is important, and that would be the case here as well. Between the salt spray and this sandy, gravelly soil, it needs to be able to conserve water as well. And I call this ghost oak. The first time I recorded it, it was around Halloween of 2020, and I was using the ghost shape to help people remember it since it was in October. But there's your ghostly shape. You can see the arms of the ghost above there and kind of some legs down below. It's a lot of variability in the shape of the leaves, but they're shinier, thicker, and definitely less lobes than that of a white oak. So if you count the number of lobes, you're going to have less. And just down the trail, this is almost like a savanna here with large spaces between the trees. And yes, that's where this prickly pear cactus is found. I recorded this up on Hook Mountain, New York in March of 2023. That hike is on my other channel. That channel's called Let's Dig a Little Deeper, and I believe the hike is called Exploring Hook Mountain, New York. And there was quite a bit of it on top of Hook Mountain, New York, underneath red cedar trees, or near red cedar trees. I didn't see any post oak up there that day. There may have been some, but I didn't see any on the part of the trail I was on. Boy, and this guy is just covered in fruits, and I don't think they're ripe yet. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure if those are the fruits. I think that's where the flowers fell off. I'm not an expert on prickly pear cactus, but I know there's a lot of it out here, which means this land was always sunny enough for it to have a population here. And the same with the top of Hook Mountain and several other mountains along the Hudson River and Delaware rivers that are prone to fires and have very thin soil. So, boy, these sure are shiny. You can really see it. There's our shiny ghost right there. And another shiny ghost right there. That one doesn't quite look like a ghost, but it sure is shiny. So you could find a post oak leaf that has as many lobes as a white oak leaf, but if you go on averages, they definitely have less and they're much shinier. And boy, they get a pretty red color in the fall. This one has a lot of lobes, but I can tell by how shiny it is that it's not a white oak. Boy, here's a, we looked at that white oak a few minutes ago where the lower branches, or the upper branches, were at eye level. Well, that's the case with this post oak too. So very similar colored bark. In the shade here, it's a little hard to see the lightness or how tan it is on a sunny day. But if we look at these upper branches, some sunny bark right there, we don't ever seem to get that flaking where it's like a door hinge opening. I don't ever seem to see that on these trees, but I haven't been around post oak that many times. I recorded it at the one of the prairies in Adams County, Ohio. I recorded it up on West Rock Ridge in Connecticut, and I've seen it a few times in Indiana when I wasn't recording. But I think they're pretty easy to tell apart if you look at the texture of the bark and the leaves. But this is a savanna Lots of open spaces between the trees. This eastern red cedar is, you know, an old field plant. It's a plant that grows in old fields, but a lot of times old fields only stay old fields for a few years, maybe 50, 100 years, and then the hardwood trees come in, take over, and shade out the northern red cedar. So many times I've seen northern red cedar on its way out in a forest that's going back to being a hardwood forest. But because of this unique location here, there's always an opportunity for these sun-loving trees, the post oak and this eastern red cedar, to persist. We're just about done this interpretive trail. We're going to walk out the beach, and there's many stands of forest as you go out towards the end. Got some scarlet oak in here. That's no surprise. It likes sandy, dry, hot locations, hilltops, deep notches here. I often say it looks like the flames of a fire, the way these leaves are shaped. It looks like the flames of a fire, the tongues of a fire, and it gets that color in November. Incredibly bright scarlet color, hence the name. So this is definitely a different feel back here. I mean, I've done a lot of hiking. I've done a lot of hiking in different places, and this is a different feel. Just the way it looks. Not even looking at the species of the trees, but just the way this looks is quite unique. Glad I had a chance to come out here. So we'll keep on hiking. Be looking for anything of interest. I keep seeing signs saying watch out for the terrapins. So if we see one, we'll record it. Meanwhile, we'll keep looking at all these post oaks. I mean, that's most of what's out here, post oak and red cedar. And keep an eye out for blackjack oak. I think I saw one earlier, but I wasn't 100% sure. We'll see if we can find more to prove I'm right. But this is mostly post oak, and they have this strange gnarled appearance, and do well in those prairie areas out west, and do well in these coastal forests. They do well on the tops of the ridges around here, at least a few ridges where I found it. But this is about as far north as it gets. So it's always interesting to find plants growing near the edge of their geographic ranges. And that's what we got right here. And here's a couple late blooming prickly pear cactus. Got one flower here in full bloom. They are pretty. They are evergreen. The plant tends to lay down, and these pads fill up with water during the growing season, and the plant tends to, the water tends to be reduced, and the pad tends to lay flat on the ground in the wintertime. This northern red cedar, or excuse me, red cedar, eastern red cedar, it's got multiple trunks. That's not uncommon for that tree, especially if it's in an area that's been burned. This post oak here, boy, what a survivor it is. Always reaching for the sun. So we had a branch lay down, and then up goes all these other branches to try to catch some sun. Right behind it, boy, this eastern red cedar, oh man, this thing must be really old. We've got limbs going all directions, 20, 30 feet out from this trunk. Again, it probably was burned and then had to send out in all directions. If the main trunk got burned back, it went out sideways instead. This is amazing. We can take a quick look at the foliage of this eastern red cedar while we're here. Pretty unique plant. I compared it with northern white cedar when I recorded it for this channel because they were both growing at that park. That's not common to find them both in the same park, but it was in that area in Adams County, Ohio. I also compared it with Atlantic white cedar, which it wouldn't be unheard of to find both in a park in eastern New England with both. That's pretty easy to find around here, at least. So pretty small little plates all stitched together on these mature branches. if you find a seedling of eastern red cedar, it has a completely different appearance. And I'm not sure if we're going to find one today. But it's almost like it's got barbed wire on it. It's covered in spines. And maybe to protect it from being grazed until it's big enough to withstand that. So even this guy here has just the mature leaves. And none of that spiny foliage that you get on a new eastern red cedar. I have a feeling a lot of these have been around a while, even the smaller ones. But we'll keep an eye out for them as they come along. Let's get out towards the end of this Orient Point, Orient Beach State Park. There's a sand spit out here. It goes back quite a ways, and it has a forest that's showing up on the satellite view. And there's an unofficial trail that goes out through that forest. And the rest of this hike is going to be on the long beach of Orient Beach State Park. This is considered a national natural landmark. And that's been that way for 44 years, it looks like, since 1980. Less official trails out here, but they're all showing up on the satellite view, so I don't think we'll have any trouble finding our way around. We can certainly walk back on the beach and walk out in this forest of mostly red cedar right here. Well, we'll have to deviate down towards the beach itself, folks, because we got an osprey's nest right in the middle of this trail. And he or she is pretty defensive of her young. I'm not sure whose turn it was to watch the nest right now. But I know what, they got claws, and I'm going to stay away from them. Boy, and of the trees we saw a few minutes ago, the white oak, the scarlet oak, the post oak, and the eastern red cedar is definitely the most common as you come out this long beach of the Orient Beach State Park. I'm going to record what I can out here. I'm limited to how far I can go. I don't want to go off trail because of trampling all this vegetation. And obviously ticks would be very common out here, so I'm trying to stay where I'm not brushing up against stuff. But it's mostly eastern red cedar out here, at least in the first half mile of this preserve. I can't continue on the Gardener's Bay side because it's roped off for piping plovers, and they need their place to nest. And the other side of the park here is just too much marsh grass, and some of it's underwater, and wouldn't be a lot of fun trying to get to where there's more forest at the end of this. And I can't tell from the satellite view if that forest actually has trees that we haven't already seen at the on that nature preserve trail. So let's loop back, and we'll try to do more exploring around that trail to see if we can sniff out some different tree species. I never know what I'm going to find on these adventures. A lot of times I'm going to places I've never been. Not surprised that they have the beach closed for the piping plovers, and that's for good reason. So we're going to, we came out about a half mile. Could have gone further at a different time of year when the piping plovers weren't nesting. And the ospreys are nesting too. I passed another nest where Mama Bird, she didn't come after me, but she let me know she was in charge and kind of circled around for a while. So we'll try to leave everybody have their nests. And let's go back up there and see if we can get some blackjack oak and maybe take a better look at what's already there. But this is a neat place. That nature trail alone, even though it's only a 3/8 of a mile long, has a different feel than any other forest I've hiked in ever. The Adams County prairies in Ohio kind of have that feel. There's always a zone at those prairies where it's going back to normal woods. And here, this is the normal woods. There is no advancing to a northern hardwood or a oak hickory forest here. This is what you got. So again, mostly eastern red cedar as you come past the developed area of Orient Bay, or excuse me, Orient Beach State Park. Yes, and these eastern red cedar trees are definitely the most common within the area that's closest to the water. And let's take a look at some of the cones. Now, I don't think anybody would ever realize this is a cone if they weren't told, because it sure looks like a berry. Botanically, these are considered cones. They go from this light green to a blue color as summer goes on. Some of them already have a purplish hue right there. So most of these trees are either male or female, and I believe it's the females that get these pollinated cones that turn the bluish color. So cedar waxwings eat them, I know that. I'm sure there's plenty of those to be found out here at the time of year when these trees are desirable, or the cones are desirable. But not every tree gets these cones every year, but when you find a tree, sometimes there's hundreds of thousands on one tree, including this one here, is just absolutely covered in cones. And here's another plant I hadn't seen before on any of my hikes. There's our prickly pear cactus, almost getting undercut by the wave action of this bay. And just above it, just above where the waves would erode it away, is this is identifying as a beach plum. That's what I just sent the photos to plant.net. That's what it thinks it is. So these are about the size, about a ½ inch in size. Too big to be service berry and too late to be service berry. This is mid-July. The leaves look like a service berry. The bark doesn't. The bark looks more like a cherry, and plum and cherry are the same thing. They're both Prunus genus. So, but a singly toothed leaf and waxy to survive the salt spray and sandy soil, help it conserve water. But these are edible when ripe, but they're not ripe yet. So this beach plum, I just looked up a little bit more. It ripens in August. Gets a dark plum colored color, so the purple, dark purple, almost black color. It's, you know, related to the Asian plum, which is the one that's cultivated for human consumption, but this is edible, and boy, there's a lot of it out here. You could live off this for a few days when ripe. So it's considered a shrub, but it's a small tree out here. There's places where it's taller than me, but it's, you know, more than one stem usually. Shrubs and trees are often told apart by how many stems come out of the ground or how many branches come out of the ground. In this case, there's 2 here and then a red cedar right behind it, and here there's 3 or 4. But as you saw earlier, those red cedars can do that, and trees can do that as well, especially if they've been damaged and the main branch gets broken off. So plenty of this beach plum growing between these eastern red cedars in places. And cousin to that beach plum, the Prunus maritima, it is Maritima, which is considered a shrub, less than 10 feet usually. We've got a much taller Prunus serratina, which is the black cherry that many of us have come to know. I've recorded these trees in the Catskill Mountains that were 3 feet in diameter, and here they're growing right at the edge of the tidal zone. So kind of a jack of all trades. I don't usually find them in the hardwood forest around here in southern New England though. Usually only in old field situations in these sandy areas. So that's where I'm finding it the most on the hikes I've done recently. And the leaf is very similar to that beach plum. Kind of shiny, with that evenly toothed edge right there. You can see that right there. And this one does have some fruits. Just like the beach plum, they haven't ripened at all yet, but they're much smaller. These are about not even a ½ inch in size, and kind of in a bunch here. So they're just starting to ripen right there. So that's how I can tell them apart. The bark on the lower trunk of this tree, it's a little hard to see because there's bayberry growing all over this sand spit here. But behind that bayberry is the telltale potato chip type bark of the black cherry. It's plum colored, kind of a purplish brown, and little flakes the size of potato chips on the branches that are large enough to get that pattern. These upper branches have more horizontal lenticels, kind of like you'd find on a black birch. But this tree's probably 30 feet high. Seems to be doing quite well out here. There's another one right back here, just as big. So this is our Maritime forest. And we'll keep looking. We got about 2 more hours to explore this whole park and see what else we can find. Boy, these post oak trees, they just, I guess they could grow straight, but they usually don't. And that's what gives this Maritime forest such a different feel. Back on that Long Beach, it was mostly eastern red cedar, at least where I was allowed to go. I don't know what was further out. I have to save that for another day, but back on this nature trail in the areas near it, it's at least 50% post oak, and I've read about post oak barrens out on Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod. Never been out there to see them. I've recorded a post oak barren up on West Rock Ridge for one of my Barking Up the Right Oak videos, and that was in the winter time. But again, it was a barren area where the trees were gnarled, twisted, and not that big. These are getting 40 feet in places. Boy, they sure are just different. They're so kind of neat, I think. Good specimen trees. Kind of reminds me of the photos I've seen of the live oaks down south. So pretty sure I saw a blackjack oak out here earlier. I'm going to see if I can track it down again, and we'll take a look at it. And meanwhile, this is at least 50% post oak, pretty much growing everywhere out here. And most of them aren't that big, but occasionally you find one that's reaching for the sky. And plenty more of our eastern red cedars growing out and up. There's another one right there. That one, part of it's died back, but right in front of it, boy, I'd seen this once in Adams County, Ohio. And I thought I saw it once on another hill on a sandstone bluff in Kentucky, but I didn't record it. And boy, does it have corky thick bark at the bottom. Since it's more likely to grow in sandy areas and prairie areas, it has to be able to withstand brush fires, and that thick bark will do it. And it stays that way right up the trunk here. Scarlet oak gets it at the bottom, but then it gets a more normal bark as you go up. So this could look like a scarlet oak at the bottom, but this is blackjack oak. The leaves, boy oh boy, that's an interesting looking leaf. 3 or 4 inches tall, 3 or 4 inches across, and almost looks like a parachute, somebody coming down in a parachute. The ones I found in Ohio had a few more points coming out. So often the leaves that are in the shade of the tree look different than the ones that are up in the full sun, but we're seeing the shade leaves right now. And yes, sometimes black oak can get this appearance, but not on every leaf. And none of these leaves are as big as a black oak. I'm pretty sure we got ourselves a blackjack oak. And boy, if you look at the range map for blackjack oak, I'd like to think I found the blackjack oak that is as far north and east as they grow. And I might have, but I don't know for sure. But they're not in any of the counties north of here. This is Suffolk County, New York. It's not showing up in any of the counties across Long Island Sound on the range maps. Some of those range maps are just done by county. And yeah, there's always trees that nobody's ever found. But this blackjack oak, you know, finds its way up the coast in sandy habitats. It finds its way into the Ohio Valley in the prairie habitats. I found it on a sandstone bluff in Kentucky where it was hot and dry and a good place for a blackjack oak to grow. So, and right next to it's a post oak. Often they do grow in community. There's many times where I found a post oak without a blackjack oak. Actually, I think this is a a white oak. Some of the white oaks out here almost look like post oaks, and some of the post oaks almost look like white oaks. So I think there may be a little hybrid, you know, they may be crossing up a little. That's not uncommon with trees, especially if there's opportunity for that to happen. So, but I'm pretty certain this is a blackjack oak with almost a triangular shaped leaf, and in places it has these little prickles sticking out the end. And again, the shade leaves, or the leaves on a small black oak can get that as well, but I'm pretty certain this is a blackjack oak. And I'm going to go ahead and do a separate recording of it today for this channel, because I haven't ever actually put it on the channel, even though I found it a few times. And as we're finishing this hike, I did find a larger blackjack oak. Again, walking along, I'm looking at this bark, I'm thinking scarlet oak, but the texture keeps going, and the leaves are more that almost pyramid type shape. It's definitely wider at the top than at the bottom. Right there. So yes, I didn't hike as far as I wanted to today, or at least as far as I was planning on. But I saw everything I came here to find and more. So what a great place to look for a maritime forest and learn what a maritime forest is. A little further out from the ferry landing is Hither Hills State Park, which has a lot of these plants. At least it says they do. That might be a place I could consider in the future. Long Island has lots of pine barrens. You need a permit to get into them, at least a lot of them. I didn't have time to apply for that. I didn't plan this hike too far in advance. So I chose this hike because it was real close to the ferry landing. I only had a day to do it, basically come over and go back in the same day. So I didn't even spend the money on bringing my car over. I just left it in New London and rode my bike over here. It was only like 3 miles from the ferry slip. Saved me the transport charge for the bike. Allowed me a little more exercise. Got in the park for free since I was on a bicycle. And allowed me to see a post oak barren, a red cedar, maritime forest, and a lot of other stuff today. So this was definitely worth doing. You can see right back here the sand dunes of Gardiner's Bay are right behind these forests. And great place to come see some plants that are just not that common in southern New England or even on Long Island.